Welcome back to Visa Verge News, where we explore the latest and most pressing stories in immigration, education, and global policy. Today, we're diving into a controversial decision by Columbia University. 3 students have been expelled for their involvement in last year's pro-Palestinian protests, including the occupation of the university's Hind Hall. Joining me is my co-host David to break this down. David, this is a pretty significant development, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Columbia University's decision has sparked a lot of debate, not just on campus, but across academic and activist circles. These expulsions mark one of the strictest responses to student activism in decades at Columbia, and it raises big questions about free speech, the limits of protest, and how institutions enforce discipline. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with the basics. On April 30th, 2024, around 50 students and activists occupied Hind Hall, which is a central building on Columbia's campus. This protest was part of pro-Palestinian activism in response to Israel's military actions in Gaza following the Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023. These students raised a Palestinian flag, advocated for divestment from companies tied to Israel, and pushed for greater financial transparency from the university. Right away, the administration saw this as a breach of campus rules. What happened from there?
So, the occupation actually followed a warning from university officials. On April 29th, the administration had demanded protesters dismantle their encampment near Hind Hall by 2 p.m., threatening disciplinary action if they refused. When the protesters stayed put, the university announced that participating in the actual building takeover would result in expulsions. At the time, this was seen as a clear message from Columbia. Breaches of campus rules during protests would face severe consequences. Fast forward to March 13, 2025, and we see Columbia fulfilling that promise by expelling 3 students involved.
And these expulsions weren't all tied to the building occupation, right? 2 of the expelled students disrupted a class taught by Avi Shilon, a professor of modern Israeli history, earlier this year on February 21st. The 3rd student, however, was directly connected to the Hind Hall takeover. That blend of incidents puts a spotlight on the multiple ways activism can challenge university rules and lead to disciplinary action.
Exactly. And it's important to understand why this is making waves. At Columbia, expulsions for nonviolent protests are rare. In the past, the university has leaned towards suspensions and reprimands for similar incidents. This stricter stance has activists and student groups crying foul, arguing that the punishments are disproportionate, especially in a university setting where free expression is typically encouraged. To them, these expulsions feel like an effort to suppress activism.
And they've been vocal about it. Student groups have staged demonstrations, including a sit-in at Milstein Library earlier this month, just days before the expulsions were formally announced. On top of that, petitions demanding leniency for these students are gaining traction. These efforts frame the expulsions as suppressing free speech and punishing political expression. Do you think that resonates beyond the campus?
It absolutely does. This controversy underscores a larger debate about how universities handle politically charged activism. Critics worry that harsh measures like expulsions could discourage future protests, creating a chilling effect on free speech. On the flip side, universities like Columbia argue they need to maintain campus order and enforce rules fairly, regardless of the political sensitivity of the issue.
It's a delicate balance. And it's not just about campus rules, there are broader legal and ethical implications here. Some activists have brought up Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race or national origin in federally funded programs. They claim the crackdown on pro-Palestinian activism might disproportionately target certain groups. That adds yet another layer of complexity.
It certainly does. But universities are also grappling with how to ensure a safe environment for all students, especially as tensions rise between groups holding opposing views. In this case, debates over anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism have further complicated the conversation. Clearly, there's no easy solution, and what Columbia is doing may set a precedent for how other schools address activism in the future.
Right, because activism is on the rise again, especially around social justice, international conflicts, and climate issues. The The way institutions respond now could shape the landscape for student protests nationwide. And speaking of precedent, Colombia's history with student protests adds another layer of scrutiny. Past movements, like those in the 1960s against the Vietnam War, were often tolerated. So why the stricter measures now? It's a question activists are asking, and it's one the university hasn't fully answered.
Exactly. And while we don't know what the long-term fallout will be, it's clear this story isn't going away anytime soon. The expelled students may choose to challenge the decision legally, and meanwhile, activist groups are keeping the pressure on through demonstrations and petitions. This situation is a reminder of how complex the intersection of free speech and institutional discipline can be.
It's a debate that goes beyond Colombia and touches on broader issues facing universities across the country. That's all we have for today, but we'll keep following this story closely. Thanks for listening to Visa Verge News, your go-to source for immigration and global education updates.
For more updates on this story and others, visit us at visaverge.com. See you next time.